Dust does not lie. People do, and labels do, and even the men who carry the keys to a place like this will lie if you press them hard enough. But dust tells the truth in a way nothing else in my collection ever has. So when I came down the long gallery on the morning of the Founder's audit and saw a thread of clean light along the base of the Aldwin Cup, where for 19 years there had been a soft gray shadow of settled time, I stopped walking. I am not a man who stops in his own gallery. I have walked that floor before the lamps are lit and after they are doused, and I know its every cold breath. But I stopped, because the cup on the plinth was perfect, and perfect was wrong. I am Theo Marlowe, and for 19 years I have been keeper of the Aldwin collection, the private treasure house of the House of Vance, kept in the east wing of Harrowmere, behind doors that 3 people in the world hold keys to. I am one of the 3. I knew that cup the way a man knows the face of an old friend, the hairline flaw under the second band of guilt, the lip worn smooth where 4 centuries of hands had lifted it, the dull bloom of age that no polish is ever permitted to touch. The piece in front of me had the flaw. It had the worn lip. It had, God help me, even the right weight when I lifted it with both gloved hands and felt my own heartbeat go strange against the metal. But the dust was wrong. The shadow at its foot was clean. I set it down very gently, because a curator who has held a thing for 19 years does not drop it even when his hands have begun to shake, and I looked up the length of the gallery to the only other living soul in that room. He stood at the far arch where the long gallery meets the Founder's stair, in the dark blue and silver of the house guard, his bearskin a black column against the morning, his white gloves folded one over the other on the rifle. Sergeant Owen Calder. He had stood that post most mornings of the last 6 years, motionless as the marble around him, and I had walked past him perhaps 2,000 times the way you walk past a clock, useful, reliable, not quite seen. He was looking at the cup. Not at me, at the cup. And his eyes, which I had never in 6 years caught moving, moved a flick down to the plinth, and back to the middle distance where a guard's eyes are supposed to live. It lasted less than a second, but I had spent my whole life learning to read the small change that means everything, the half-millimeter of difference between a master's brushstroke and a forger's, and I knew what I had just seen. Sergeant Calder had seen the same wrong thing I had. He had been seeing it, I understood, with a cold drop in my stomach, longer than I had. I crossed to him. It is not done. One does not chat with the standing guard, and I am a formal man in a formal house. But I stood close enough to speak under my breath and said, "Sergeant." The cup. For a moment I thought he would not answer, that the discipline of the post would swallow my words the way that gallery swallows footsteps. Then, without his lips seeming to move at all, in a voice pitched for my ear and no further, he said, 3 days, sir. The shine is wrong. They cleaned it. You don't clean 400 years off a thing unless you're afraid of what the dirt would say. I have employed restorers, conservators, and scholars with letters after their names enough to fill a doorframe. Not one of them would have said it better, and not one of them had said it at all. I had a forgery in my gallery. I was almost sure of it now, and the only person in Harrowmere who had noticed was the man I had walked past 2,000 times without a word. "You're certain?" I said. "No, sir." His eyes never left the air in front of him. "Certain isn't mine to be, but it's wrong. I've watched that cup go gray by inches for 6 years. 3 days ago it stopped being gray. A thing doesn't get younger on its own." The Founder's audit was in 9 days. The whole collection would be open to the trustees, valued, photographed, and 3 of its finest pieces, the Aldwin Cup chief among them, sent out on loan to a touring exhibition under guard. If the cup that left Harrowmere was a fake, then somewhere out there in the world the real one was already moving, and the moment the exhibition crates were sealed under official seals, the swap would become permanent and unprovable. Whoever had done this had not chosen the timing by accident. They had 9 days, and so did I. I should have gone straight to the controller of the house. I did not. I went back up the gallery, my pulse loud in my ears, and I did the thing a curator does when the floor tilts under him. I looked closer. I took the cup to the conservation bench in the small room behind the gallery, and under the raking lamp I found what I should have feared to find. It was beautiful work. The flaw under the second band was there, but it was painted, a hair too even, lacking the depth a real crack carries down into the metal. The worn lip was abraded by hand, recently, the scratches all running one direction where 400 years of use would have crossed them 1,000 ways. And the dust that someone had so carefully reapplied to the body to make it look untouched, was the wrong dust, not the fine gray ash of a sealed room and slow decades. Newer, coarser, the dust of a workshop, sieved on to mimic time and betraying itself to anyone who had breathed the real thing for 19 years. I sat down on the conservator's stool and put my gloved hands flat on the bench to stop them moving. 3 people held keys to this wing. Myself, the controller, Sir Aldous Penhale, who had hired me, championed me, and stood as godfather to a child I no longer had, and the curator of acquisitions, a polished young man named Julian Reeve, who had come to us 2 years ago with brilliant references and an instinct for what would sell. 3 keys. One of them had let a forger in, or had carried the forgery in himself. And the only witness I trusted in the whole of Harrowmere was a sergeant of the guard who was not permitted to speak, move, or leave his post without an order, and who had seen the truth before any of us because he was the only man in the building, paid simply to watch and never to want. I went back down the gallery. Calder stood exactly as I had left him, as if the room had grown him there. I stopped at the edge of what was proper, and I said, very low, "Sergeant, I'm going to need your eyes for 9 days. Not your word against anyone, your eyes. Will you watch this room for me and tell me only what you see?" A silence. The great gallery clock counted it out for us, tick by tick. "Sir," he said at last, "I've been watching this room for 6 years and telling no one. It'll be a change to tell someone." And then, after the smallest pause, in that same voice that did not seem to come from a moving mouth, "But you should know, I'm not the only one who's noticed me noticing." I asked him what he meant, and the answer came in the spare, careful inventory of a man who had learned long ago that the world is saved by detail. 2 nights before the cup changed, he said, the guard roster had been altered. His name had been moved off the night watch on the long gallery and replaced by a new man, a relief sergeant named Holt, drafted in from another house to balance the duty book, signed off by an authority Calder would not name to me because he did not yet have proof, only the changed page. On the night Holt stood the gallery, the camera that watched the founder's stare had logged a 4-minute fault and reset itself. 4 minutes. Long enough to lift one cup off a plinth and set another in its place, if your hands were sure and the room was yours. "I read the duty book every morning, sir," Calder said. "Same as I read this room. A man who moves you off a post the week before a thing goes missing isn't balancing his book. He's clearing a window." I felt the floor tilt a second time. The thing was no longer a curiosity of dust and brushwork. It was a plan, and plans have authors, and the author had already begun to move the only honest witness out of the way. "Who signed the change?" I asked. "That's the part I'll not say out loud, sir." His eyes did not move. "Not because I don't know whose hand it was, because I know what happens to a guardsman who names a senior man on a feeling. I lose the post, the testimony, and the chance to do anything but be right in a corner somewhere while they finish the job. I've been a soldier longer than I've been a statue. You don't fire before you have the shot. I have thought a great deal since about that sentence. You don't fire before you have the shot. It is the whole creed of his kind in 9 words, the patience that the rest of us mistake for emptiness. I had walked past that patience 2,000 times and called it furniture. I went to find Julian Reeve. He was in the acquisitions office with the morning light on him like a portrait, charming and quick, a sheaf of loan agreements under his hand. When I mentioned lightly that I wanted the Aldwin Cup off the exhibition list and held back for conservation, his face did a thing faces do when they are calculating and trying not to show it. "The cup is the centerpiece, Theo. he said, smiling. Pull it and the whole loan loses its anchor. The trustees would be furious. What's the matter, a spot of tarnish? And he laughed, and the laugh was a half-second too long, and at the end of it his eyes went to the door behind me as though counting how alone we were. I told him it was nothing, a conservator's caution, and I left, and in the corridor my heart was going like a hammer. He had not asked which conservation issue. A man who loves a thing asks what's wrong with it. A man who knows it's a fake asks how much you've found out. But suspicion is not proof, and Julian Reeve held only one of 3 keys. So did Sir Aldous Penhale, and I owed Sir Aldous everything I was. He had pulled me out of a provincial museum 20 years ago and made me keeper. He had sat with me through the worst night of my life and never once spoken of it after. If the thread ran to him, I did not think my hands would be steady enough to follow it. Which is exactly, I told myself in the cold gallery that night, why I had to follow it whether they were steady or not. A curator who only investigates the people he is willing to lose is not a curator. He is an accomplice with good taste. For 3 days I did 2 things at once. By day I played the calm keeper, signing the loan papers, smiling at Reeve, agreeing the cup would travel. By night I came down to the gallery where Sergeant Calder stood the late watch. I had quietly restored him to it, the one move I could make without raising a flag, and I learned to see the room the way he saw it. He taught me, in murmured fragments between long silences, what watching truly is. Which floorboard near the founder's stair gave a particular creak, so that a man crossing it in soft shoes still announced himself to anyone who listened. Which of the high windows held a faint reflection of the service corridor, so that a guard facing forward could still see who came and went behind his own shoulder. How the air of the gallery changed when an outer door 3 rooms away was opened, a breath of difference most men would never feel. "You've memorized the building," I said. "I've memorized the building, sir," he agreed. "It's the only weapon they let me carry that's worth anything." On the 3rd night, he gave me the thing I had been afraid to ask for. He told me he had seen the relief sergeant, Holt, twice now after his shift, in a part of the grounds with no reason to take him there, the old coach road that runs down to the river gate, the one delivery route into Harrowmere that does not pass the main lodge or its book of names. "If something's going out of this house unseen," Calder said, "it's going out the river gate, and a thing that's going out has to be packed somewhere first." He let that settle. "There's a room off the lower store that's been locked these 3 weeks. New lock. Not on my keys, not on yours, I'd guess. A storeroom doesn't need a new lock unless someone's storing something they don't want stored. A new lock on a room that should have had none. The river gate. A relief sergeant moving in the dark on a road with no names. I had walked into my gallery 9 days from the audit to find a perfect cup, and now I stood in the same gallery at midnight, understanding that I was inside a machine someone had been building for weeks, and that the only part of it I could trust was a man the machine had already tried to remove. "Sergeant," I said, "if I asked you to come off your post to leave it in the dark against every order you've ever taken and help me open a door that isn't mine, what would you say?" He was quiet a long time. When he answered, his voice had changed, just slightly, the soldier under the statue, surfacing. "I'd say a guardsman doesn't leave his post, sir. It's the first thing they teach you and the last thing you forget." A pause. "And then I'd say the post was never the floor, sir. The post is the trust. If the trust is being robbed 3 doors down, then standing pretty on this tile while it happens isn't keeping my post. It's deserting it with my boots still on the mark." He let the gallery hold that. "Tell me when. I'll be where the trust is." I did not have to wait long for when. The next morning the loan documents came back from the trustees signed and sealed, and with them an instruction I had not expected and could not refuse. The 3 loan pieces, the Aldwyn Cup chief among them, were to be moved that very evening from the gallery down to the lower store, crated for transport, and held under seal until the carrier came at dawn. Crated by whom? By the curator of acquisitions, Julian Reeve, to expedite the schedule, and witnessed, the paper said, by a single duty officer of the guard. The relief sergeant, Holt, not me. The keeper of the collection was, with a courteous stroke of a senior pen, written out of the handling of his own treasures on the one night it mattered. I understood the whole shape of it then, standing in my office with the sealed paper in my hand. The swap was not even finished. The fake on the plinth had been a rehearsal, a test of whether anyone would notice, and someone had. But the someone was a sergeant no one would believe and a curator who had not yet said a word. Tonight the real cup, still somewhere in this house, would go into a crate marked with the fake's papers, sealed under official wax and shipped out as the genuine article on loan. Once it was abroad and beyond our jurisdiction, it would simply never come back, lost to transit, while the painted forgery returned to the plinth to grow old and gray and never be questioned again. The locked storeroom was where the swap would be made, in the 4 hours between the gallery and the dawn carrier, with only Reeve and Holt in the room and the keeper safely upstairs. They had thought of everything except the dust, and the man who reads dust. I sent Calder a single line by the one means I trusted, a folded note inside the duty book where only he read each morning in my own hand. Lower store. The new lock. Tonight when the gallery is dark. Bring nothing but your eyes. Then I spent the longest day of 19 years pretending to be a man who suspected nothing, signing where I was told to sign, wishing the controller a good evening when he passed me in the marble hall and watching his old, kind, unreadable face for the tell I prayed I would not find. At 11:15, with Harrowmere asleep and the gallery lamps doused, I went down the service stair to the lower store. Calder was already there. He had come off the late watch by the book, relieved on schedule, his post properly handed over, so that no one could ever say he had abandoned it, and changed out of the bearskin into the plain dark of the off-duty soldier, and he moved through that lower corridor without sound, the way the gallery had taught me he could. We stood together outside the storeroom with its bright new lock, and from somewhere ahead of us, beyond a second door, came the small dishonest sounds of work being done in secret. The rasp of packing straw, the creak of a lid, a low voice and then another answering it. 2 men, Calder breathed, Reeve and Holt. The crates open. He was utterly calm. The calm, I realized, was not absence of fear, but the discipline that puts the fear somewhere it cannot reach your hands. Sir, what is it you mean to do? Because I'll tell you now what I'll not do. I'll not lay hands on a man on a feeling, and I'll not let you do a thing in here that turns the law against us instead of them. If we go in shouting, it's your word and mine against a senior curator and a sergeant, and the cup vanishes in the confusion. We don't fire before we have the shot. We need the cup in their hands and the truth in plain sight before anyone, with the authority to stop it, walks in. He was right, and the rightness of it was maddening, because every nerve in me wanted to throw open the door and shout thief at the man who held one of 3 keys to my life's work. But I had not spent 6 nights at the feet of a man who waited for a living without learning the one thing he had to teach. I made myself breathe. Then what do? We make them show us, he said, and we make sure it's seen by eyes that can't be argued with. Is the lower store camera on your system, sir, or theirs? I had not even thought of it. The lower store had a single old camera feeding to the security room, and the security room's logs went to the controller's office, Sir Aldis's office, the one authority above Reeve in the whole house. If Sir Aldis was clean, that footage would hang Reeve in the morning. If Sir Aldis was part of it, the footage would simply disappear the way the camera on the founder's stair had developed its convenient 4-minute fault. Everything came down to the question I had been too much of a coward to answer for 9 days. Was the man who made me one of them? It's on the house system, I said. It feeds to the controller. Calder looked at me, really looked, for the first time, his eyes leaving the middle distance and finding mine in the dark. Then there's your shot, sir, he said quietly. Not a swing, not a shout. We get them on that camera lifting the real cup into the crate and the fake out of it, and then we don't stop them at all. We let it be seen. The truth's the only weapon in this house that outranks a key. He paused. But you'll have to be the one to wake the controller and bring him down here to watch his own screen. I can witness. I can't accuse a senior man and be believed. You can. That's the part of the post that's yours, sir, not mine. He had just handed me the hardest order I would ever take. Go and wake the man I loved like a father, and bring him to a screen that might show me he had betrayed everything we both served. I went up the stair on legs that did not feel like mine, and behind me Sergeant Calder settled against the cold wall in the dark, motionless, watching the door, doing the only thing he had ever been trained to do, and the only thing, it turned out, that could save us. He waited. Sir Aldous Penhale answered his door in a dressing gown, his white hair wild, his old eyes sharpening the instant he saw my face. I had rehearsed a dozen careful openings on the stair and used none of them. "Sir," I said, "the Aldwyn Cup is being stolen tonight in the lower store by Julian Reeve, and the relief sergeant is in it with him. And I need you to come to the security room now and watch it happen on your own camera, because I cannot prove this without you, and I am praying to God it is not you." For a moment he did not move at all, and in that moment I died a little because I read it as guilt. Then he said very low, "You thought it might be me. It was not a question. 19 years, Theo, and you came up these stairs at midnight wondering if I'd sell the thing I gave my life to." His face did something I had never seen it do. "Good," he said. "Good. You were right to wonder. A keeper who'd trust me over the evidence isn't a keeper. Get me to that screen." We went down through the sleeping house to the security room, and Sir Aldous woke the screens with a stiff finger, and there, in cold gray light, was the lower store. The open crate, the straw, Julian Reeve in shirt sleeves with a senior curator's comm, and the relief sergeant Holt lifting from a velvet-lined case the Aldwyn Cup. The real one. I knew it the instant I saw it. Knew it by the way the light sat into its true and ancient gray, and lowering it toward the crate while on the bench beside them sat the painted fake, waiting to take its place in the world forever. Sir Aldous made a sound in his throat like a man struck. His hand went to the desk telephone. "I'll have the constables here in." "Sir, no." It was my own voice, and it surprised me with its steadiness, because I had spent 6 nights learning steadiness from a master. "If we send men crashing down there now, Reeve will say he was crating it under instruction. Holt will say he saw nothing, and it becomes a muddle of words. The real cup's already half into the crate. The moment it's sealed under the loan wax, it's the genuine article on paper and gone tomorrow. We have to take it before the lid closes, and we have to take it so it can never be talked away." I looked at him. "Sergeant Calder is at the door. He's waited there an hour to be sure of the shot. Let him have it. Come down behind me and bring the watch log, and let's catch the cup in the air." I do not know what made the old man trust me, whether it was the evidence on the screen or 19 years or the simple animal certainty in my voice, but he came. We went down the service stair fast and quiet, and as we reached the lower corridor I saw Calder rise from the dark by the door without a sound, a question in the set of his shoulders. I gave him the only signal we had agreed, a single nod. Now. What happened then took less than a minute, and I have replayed it 10,000 times. Calder did not kick the door or shout. He simply opened it. He had, I learned later, slipped the new lock an hour before with a tool and a patience I will never possess, and left it sitting closed so that nothing would seem disturbed. And he stepped into the light of that storeroom, the way the gallery clock strikes the hour, without hurry and without doubt, and he said one sentence in a voice that filled the room without rising. "Set it down, gentlemen. That cup belongs to the house." Reeve spun, his charm gone white. Holt's hand dropped to where a weapon would be if he had been the soldier he pretended to be, and Calder's eyes went to that hand and stayed there, and he said, still level, still unmoving, "I wouldn't. You're a sergeant of nothing tonight, and I've taken worse men than you off worse than a packing bench." It was not a threat. It was a weather report. Holt's hand came back up empty. "And the real cup, the true Aldwyn Cup, 400 years old and worth more than every man in that room would earn in 1,000 lifetimes, was in the air between the case and the crate, in Reeves' two hands frozen there. For one terrible heartbeat I thought he would drop it, smash it, take from the house what he could not steal. Calder saw it too. He did not lunge. He took one slow step, set his open white-gloved hand beneath the cup like a man receiving a sacrament, and said almost gently, "Into my hand, sir. You don't want to be the man who broke it. There's no walking back from broken." And Julian Reeve, who had a plan for everything but a steady man with an open hand, lowered the Aldwin cup into the glove of the sergeant he had tried to write out of the duty book. Then Sir Aldous stepped into the doorway with the watch log under his arm and the whole gray weight of the house in his face, and it was over. It was, I understood, watching Calder stand there cradling 4 centuries in one glove while the forger's hands began to shake over. The constables came at last, properly summoned, properly recorded, the camera's footage already copied twice on Sir Aldis's order before any hand could touch it. Reeve tried, even then, the only weapon he had ever truly carried. He talked. He was crating under instruction. He was the victim of a relief sergeant gone rogue. He had references, friends, the trustees' confidence. Did we know who he was? This was a misunderstanding that a sensible man would settle quietly before careers were ruined. He turned the full warmth of that practiced face on Sir Aldous, then on me, and last of all because he had a clever man's instinct for the weakest plank in any floor, on the silent guardsman holding the cup. "You," he said to Calder, soft and reasonable. "You're a sergeant on a sergeant's pay. There's a number we could write tonight that would change your whole life, and no one any the wiser. Set the cup down and walk out and forget the door was ever open." He was offering to buy him. I had seen men try to buy Owen Calder's silence with mockery and with menace. I watched a man try to buy it with money, and I held my breath. Calder did not so much as turn his head. He kept his eyes on Holt and the cup level in his glove, and he answered in the flat, unbothered tone of a man declining a second cup of tea. "I've stood a post for 11 shillings a day, and whether that would kill you, sir, because the thing behind me was worth standing for. You can't put a number on that. You can only fail to understand there isn't one, a beat. And it's not my door, it's the house's door. I just kept it." That was all. He did not raise his voice or his hand. But Julian Reeves' face came apart at last. The charm, the calculation, the certainty that every man has a price and every wall a gate, and what was left underneath was simply a thief in shirt sleeves who had been caught by the one kind of man his whole clever life had never accounted for. A man who could not be moved, mocked, frightened, or bought. The constables took him out by the side door. Holt went with them. The river gate, when Sir Aldis's people opened it at dawn, gave up a waiting van and 2 more names, and the locked storeroom, when I finally had its new key, held the rest of the story in neat, damning order. The forger's tools, the sieved workshop dust in a labeled jar, the velvet case cut to the cup's exact dimensions, and a second crate already addressed to a private collector across a border we would never have followed it past. They had meant to take 3 pieces, not 1. We had caught the machine with its hand still in the works. The real Aldwin cup went back to its plinth before the lamps were lit. I carried it up the gallery myself, in both gloved hands, with Sergeant Calder walking the proper 2 paces behind me as escort, and I set it down in the soft gray shadow of its own settled time, the true dust no forger could ever quite counterfeit, and I stood a moment looking at the faint clean line at its foot where it would, over the patient years, go gray again. The fake we kept. Sir Aldous would not have it destroyed. "Put it in the study room," he said, "behind glass, with a card that tells the whole truth that it fooled the trustees, the carriers, and the cleverest curator in the country for 9 days, and was caught by a man who was only ever paid to stand still and watch. Let the scholars learn from it. Let the students see that the eye that saved this collection wasn't the trained one." He looked at me when he said it kindly, and I took the rebuke I had earned, because it was true. I had walked past the truth 2,000 times. The truth had been standing at the arch in a bearskin the whole while, seeing what I was too busy being clever to see. There was an inquiry, of course. There always is. And in the inquiry a difficulty arose that I had not foreseen. By the strict letter of the regulations, Sergeant Calder had left his post. He had come off the late watch by the book, yes. But he had then entered a part of the house he had no orders to enter, slipped a lock, and laid hands on a senior member of the household staff. A junior officer with a clipboard and no imagination put it to him plainly, in front of the board, that a guardsman's first duty is to his post, and asked whether he understood that he had broken it. I was there. I will tell you exactly what he said, because I have never forgotten it and I never will. He came to attention. He did not argue or plead or remind them of the cup now safe on its plinth. He said, "Sir, I was taught that the post is sacred and the post is never abandoned, and I believe both of those things with my whole life. But I was taught something before that the first week by a sergeant older than the king, that the post was never the patch of floor. The floor's just where they put you to do the thing. The post is the trust. The day they hand you the bearskin, they're not telling you to guard a tile. They're telling you to guard the thing behind you, and that morning the thing behind me was being carried out the river gate while I stood pretty on my tile. If I'd kept my boots on the mark and let it go, sir, I'd have kept the floor and deserted the post. I chose the post. I'll stand by that to the wall and past it." A silence in that room you could have heard a pin drop into. "If the regulations say I'm wrong, sir, then I'm wrong, and I'll take what's coming. But I'd do it again tonight and every night, for as long as you'll let me wear the coat." The board cleared him, more than cleared him. Sir Aldous saw to it that the regulation itself was rewritten, that the watch of the Aldwin collection was henceforth charged in writing not merely with the holding of a post, but with the keeping of the trust in those words, so that no honest guardsman after Owen Calder would ever again have to choose between the floor and the duty and gamble his career on choosing right. They offered him a commendation. He declined the ceremony and accepted the words, which was very like him. They offered to move him up and off the gallery to a softer post with his rank. He asked to stay exactly where he was. So he is there still, at the arch where the long gallery meets the founder's stair, a black column against the morning, his white gloves folded one over the other on the rifle, his eyes living in the middle distance where a guard's eyes are supposed to live. The tourists who come on open days walk past him the way I once did, useful, reliable, not quite seen, and photograph the great cup on its plinth, and never know how close it came to being a clever lie behind glass in another country, or that the only reason it is real is a man who was paid to stand still and chose, on one night, to stand for something instead. I do not walk past him anymore. Each morning I come down the long gallery before the lamps are lit, and I stop at the arch, and I say, "Morning, Sergeant," and he says, "Morning, sir," and neither of us says anything else, because nothing else needs saying between two men who once caught 4 centuries in the air together. Then I go to the plinth and I check the cup, and I check the dust, the true gray dust, settling its patient, honest record back over the thing it nearly lost, and I think the same thought I think every single day. Dust does not lie, and neither, it turns out, does a man who has spent his whole life learning to be still. The rest of us look at such a man and see furniture, a clock, a wall. We are wrong. He is not the wall. He is the only thing in the whole bright house that was ever actually watching. And on the day it mattered, the day the relic came back wearing the wrong dust, he was the one who would not look away.